What if the real reason why your team aren't performing isn't anything to do with strategy or plan, but everything to do with emotion? In this Lead to Succeed podcast episode, former British Army psychological operations officer Cara Cunniff talks about emotion. She's now an emotion culture specialist. And Cara takes us through how to detect the emotional undercurrents at work and why that's important, how to map out an emotional feeling journey, and the important emotional rituals that will completely transform the culture in your business. If you want to increase the performance of your team, this is the Lead to Succeed episode that's going to show you what to do and how to do it. Very, very practical tips from Cara, and it's going to change how you feel about emotion and leadership at work. Welcome. Today we have Cara Cunniff joining us. If you're a small business owner or a leader in an organization and you're juggling growth and juggling leading a team, but thinking there's just that something more that needs to unlock the performance of your team, maybe they're not as engaged as you'd like them to be, or as strong and high performing as you think they could be, then this episode is for you, because Cara is going to help us unlock what it is to have a high performing team. So big welcome to you, Cara, a former Army psychological operations officer. Please do a little intro to yourself.
Thank you, Rebecca. So who am I and what do I stand for? What I stand for is connection. And everything about me is about people connecting, humans connecting, having better conversations. And in every step of the way, it's about how people connect. Then moving into psychological operations, where I was a reservist army officer. And that was all about influencing behavior in high stake environments. So again, it's about connection. And then moving forward to the space that I'm in now, which is about workplace emotional culture. And that's the heartbeat of the work that I do now. It's all about how do we build, co-create emotional cultures, desired emotional cultures within businesses, because every business has an emotional culture, even if you're not aware of it. And the question is, are you working with it? Are you developing it? Are you supporting the emotions within the business? Or are you suppressing it or avoiding it? And in those spaces, which we can talk about more, that's where a lot of issues arise when we don't acknowledge emotions in business.
Well, certainly a lot of areas that we can dive into there, Cara. Firstly, thanks very much for jumping on the podcast with us. I'm really keen to jump into your background as a British Army psychological operations officer.
Big phrase, right?
It is a bit of a phrase, yeah. Sounds fascinating. I don't really know anything about that, but I would imagine that's been quite formative in terms of your outlook on emotional workplace culture. So perhaps we could start there, and you could tell us a little bit more what that experience was like.
So I think to start off, let's call it PsyOps. It's a little bit easier to say. So if we call it PsyOps, actually for me, this came about in the early 2000. This was, it's a while back when the British military formalized our psychological operations capability. Up until that point, it had been very much driven by the US. But actually, at that point, it's when we decided as Brits that we needed to have our own capability. And what was interesting for me, and I think looking back now, is the tech developments in psychological operations, with obviously now there would be a hefty piece of AI being used. Looking back, so to give you some context about what PsyOps is all about influencing hearts and minds. It's almost, as you would term it, soft power. It's how we support the operation that is happening within a theatre of operations, within a war or peacekeeping situation. Because, we are very much in that space. We don't want to have wars. We want to peacekeep. So what can we do to support that through influencing hearts and minds? And that starts with emotions. That starts with being able to connect with people on the ground, people who are actually just living within a space. and we need them to move from A to B. We've seen that a lot regularly in the press recently, contingents of civilians needing to move. That will all be done from an emotional perspective, because actually people have to buy in. To do anything, to make any change happen, you can use the whip. Of course you can use the whip. You will move. But actually, if you want to engage, and this talks directly to the workplace as well, if you want people to engage and to embrace as much as is possible the change, then emotionally is where it begins. And it's about developing those strong connections. So what is PsyOps? It's about the audience, whoever that audience is, and influencing them to take an action through hearts and minds. And so I was involved in the inaugural setup of that. So that was fascinating, again, being part of a very new and important team. It wasn't easy, but in any of those situations where it's not easy, it's, what is the smallest step I can take to keep moving forward?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting what you're saying around sort of getting people to embrace the change that you want to see. And you mentioned doing that through sort of influencing their hearts and minds. Could you maybe share an example of your time in the army about how you actually got to put that into practice and kind of see that through?
Yeah, so without talking about some specifics of operations, what that can look like is, so needing to move a contingent of civilians for safety reasons and wanting to get them to move, it's as simple and as complex as dropping little wind-up radios. You can't drop things that need batteries, because what if they haven't got batteries? And within those little wind-up radios, they may be set to a certain channel. And on that certain channel, we'll have messages to support them in their move for what they have to do from moving from A to B. And it can also be about wellness programs. So it's information. What information do I need to disseminate? What is the best way to disseminate that information? And how am I going to connect my audience to that information?
I would imagine there's probably a lot of parallels between some of those things you mentioned there, Cara, to building out a strong sort of like emotional culture in the workplace. And I would imagine that was quite a formative experience for the work you do now. Am I correct? How has that shaped the work you do?
Well, I think you mentioned something earlier, which was about change, and we are living in change now. Change is what we know. And actually you just need to get with the program, because it's not going away and it's just getting faster. And, I look at my parents who are managing to use an iPhone, and they manage it, with love. It's not something they really want to be doing, but they do it. And they've had to get with the program. And in the same way, organizations need their people to be change ready. And when I say change ready, what does that look like? Well, okay, over the next week, how do you want your people to feel to be successful? How do you not want your people to feel to be successful? But they might from time to time. And when you address specific emotions, like we want our people to feel maybe connected, maybe appreciated, but we want them to feel it. It's not a sort of a value that's put on a board in a reception area. What is going on inside for that person? So we want them to feel connected. Okay, so we've worked out it's appreciated, connected, maybe it's open-minded, and we don't want them to feel. We don't want them to
Stressed.
Absolutely, yes, disconnected, stressed. Absolutely. What you then do is talk about the rituals and the habits that need to be in place to foster that emotion. So we want our people to be appreciated. What do we need to do? And that's the beauty. It's the doing bit. It's the behavior that sits behind that word connected. Okay, how do we know our people feel connected? How are they showing up that is showing us that they are connected? So it's kind of like, it's your measurement piece that sits behind that. And it's the conversations that come out of that. We want them to feel appreciated, or we don't want them to feel disconnected. Well, okay, why might they feel disconnected? Okay, they might feel disconnected because we're not having weekly check-ins. Okay, we need to start having weekly check-ins. Okay, what does that look like? So it's the conversation that comes out of that. And I'm talking very much at the moment from a top-down approach. Okay, we're making a decision that that's how we would like our people to feel. But actually, engagement wins when it's co-created. So coming from a bottom up, where with your team, you co-create those desired emotions. So from my space, I do this through workshops where we would then, as a team, we would all decide how we want to feel. maybe there's a new systems implementation. Maybe there's a return to office happening. And how, as a team, do we want to feel to be successful? It allows difficult conversations to happen. And it's often in that difficult conversation space where real gold sits, because there is a psychologically safe space to air feelings that are important, that are, and I have 4 V's. We want emotions to be visible. It is okay to have emotions. Just because I say the word emotion doesn't have to be a nicky feeling. It can be a good feeling. So let's now think about actually what desired emotions do we want to have? So, and are they visible? How are they showing up? Because the next V is value. They are data points for the business. They are signals as to how your workforce are feeling. And if you think about sometimes maybe back into your Sunday nights through your career, how did you feel on that Sunday night when you knew you had work the next day? And all of us will have very different experiences of that question. Has a business ever asked you how you feel? How do you want to feel? So, they are signals. They are important signals. They're value. When you validate emotions, you are doing more than listening. You are actually saying, I'm listening to you. I have a different perspective on the world. And so by you telling me how you feel is giving me an insight into what your lived experience is. So, that is critical. And when you bring all those 3 together, what you actually have is something that is unbelievably valuable to the business as an asset. You understand what your emotional assessment is. You've gone and assessed the undercurrent within the organization, because that is what emotions are. They are an undercurrent. They're not always visible. The person who goes into a meeting and maybe there's some power play going on. Maybe there's somebody who's unbelievably confident in the meeting, and therefore, as an individual, you may feel silenced. So the business is losing opportunities because you may have the idea. You may be the one that is sitting there with the idea, with that game-changing piece of information that you don't feel you can speak up and say. And that is why my mission is to bring emotions not anymore as a silent driver, but as a real overt positive driver within the organization.
And when you've got an organization that's going on this journey, Cara, of maybe they've got like a certain, as you said, every organization has an emotional culture, right? Maybe they're at point A and they want to get to point B, and they've kind of mapped out what those values look like, and they know how they want their employees to feel, and so on. What do you find tends to be the biggest challenges that companies find in going on that journey?
Sustainability. It's not a quick fix. It's not a, kind of one day wonder. It is about a journey. And sometimes it's actually not even about the end game. It's not about that final day, because there isn't a final day. It's about keeping those emotions alive and creating a space where it's all about real lived desired experiences. And so actually one of the hurdles is embedding this across the organization, because that's when it works very well. It's when it's embedded across the organization. And that's, as I see as one of my roles, is but it is also to educate the organization as to how they need to bring this in themselves. The buy-in is through them. And sometimes there are individuals who just say, I don't do emotions. I just don't do them. End of. And that can be a blocker. And so it's about, in that situation, it's about, having that honest conversation, almost by deciding that you just don't do them, says we need to have a conversation. That is the voice. So identifying champions within the organization, that's quite easy to do, actually. It's surprising when you use the word emotion. There are those who love it and dive in and are all over it, and then there are those who say, do you know what, that's just not for me. When I talk about emotions, this isn't about developing a space that everybody is sharing everything heart on sleeve. We have work to do. We have a business to run. But what it does is it's just about building a deep trust within the organization, that I feel safe and I feel validated. And for those people who this doesn't necessarily sit as comfortably with, that can often be because it has just been something that's just been never spoken about in childhood, in relationships. No one has ever asked you maybe how you feel. And I would say just lean into that a little bit. And if the only thing that happens is that you can recognize, gosh, I felt alone, but I didn't know it because I've given myself the time and space to listen, to lean into myself, to be kind to myself. And I actually had a gentleman on a workshop recently who had said at the beginning, I don't do emotions. I'm here and I'm open, but I'm just telling you up front. And I said, for me, it's about setting the boundaries. That's okay. That's okay. We're all on different parts of our journey here. That's okay that, you are where you are. And I do this through a deck of emotional cards. So I show you desired emotions and I show you undesired emotions. And it's about what resonates in that space. And he saw the word alone, and he was the one that advocated and said, I didn't know I felt it. I didn't know. And now you've shown me that. I know I feel that. And now I can do something about it. So, the habit change that he was going to bring in was about his social connectedness outside of the workplace.
Well, great that you're changing people's perception of it being okay to show emotions in the workplace, which I think is very powerful. But a couple of questions for you, Cara. The first one is, if you're a business owner, how do you know what are the symptoms, what are the telltale signs that your workforce are disengaged, and what are the signs that they are engaged?
So if you're starting to suffer with signs of burnout, that really is about tempers that maybe flare quickly, mood swings. And there are two reasons why it's really important to look for things like that and to see things like that. Firstly, obviously, it's for the well-being of the individual. It's absolutely paramount that that individual is taken care of. It can be as simple as silence, not contributing, just not saying things, just going in and being transactional. I'm just here to do my job. I don't have those social relationships. Now, it's not for everybody to come into work and to have those social connections. Some people do just want to come and do their job. But often you will see it when it gets difficult, when it's hard, when the pressure's on, and when you need your team to step up, but they're not able to. Things are starting to get dropped. Jobs that you're asking people to do for whatever reason, they're not doing. But the one thing I will add on this is, unless you are proactively addressing this from an emotional space, you may not even know the signs. You may not even see them because that individual may not want or feel that they can express that. They may just be coming in and doing the job. So it is so critical to have those conversations because you don't know what you don't know.
So what we're saying here is the leader has to have a high degree of awareness of that. So what if a leader isn't emotionally aware, for example, or not picking up on these things? What should leaders do to kind of tap into this, to be aware of it?
They actually need to do some work on themselves. It starts with us. It's the self-awareness piece. So it can be as simple as starting to read some books on it, read some books on emotional intelligence. It depends on where this leader is within the organization. Okay. If they are at the top, and I do see this when I work with HR and they come back to me with the question of, I think this is amazing and I think we need to do this, but I know when I go and ask for budget, there's going to be a difficult conversation because said person doesn't tap into emotions. What I would say is, let's have a conversation about them, and then we'll see whether there is still that same feeling. And I know it sounds like a really vague answer, but the difficulty here is you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how good it is until you've started to do the work in it. And so it is things like, stress. It's all the things that you often see in well-being programs. What do we need to do? Mindfulness work. All that stuff is really, really, really good because it talks to the emotional part of the body. Emotions, when they are left unchecked, they then can build emotional contagion, and that is something that a leader may see. So you may have a team that actually was working really, really well, and a new individual comes in, and for whatever reason, the mood changes. You can't put your finger on it because it's not something necessarily you can see, but the dynamics of the team changes. And that can sometimes bring in, depending on the nature of that individual that you've brought in, can be a fear thing. It can be power play. It can be that just actually their manner isn't something that has been within the team before. Some people are more abrupt than others, and that's my perception of the world, but their perception of the world is they're not abrupt. They're just doing their job. But the emotional contagion piece is something you can see when moods change within a team and dynamics change within a team. And if you if you're not having those conversations, those honest conversations, I get asked, how do I start this? How do we begin on this journey? And I would just say, ask 2 questions. This coming week, how do we want to feel to be successful as a team? If it's something you've never, ever spoken to your team about, there may be oh my gosh, that's quite a meaty question. But just start slowly. Just give me one word that's important to you about how you want to feel this week. And how do you not want to feel? I don't want to feel disconnected. Oh, okay. You've used that word. Why have you used that word? Okay, let's have a conversation about that word, disconnected. What does disconnected mean to you? Has something happened where disconnection has shown up? Gosh, I didn't see that. Okay, so disconnection has shown up for you. It looked like that for you. What can we do about it? So asking, how or what do I want to feel to be successful? What do I not want to feel to be successful? And, if you're listening to this as a leader yourself, preparing for your week ahead, ask yourself, how do I want my people to feel in my presence? How do I not want my people to feel in my presence? And give yourself some time to think about those words and what can you do more of to feel, so that your people feel more of that feeling that you want them to feel. As we spoke about earlier, every day is a learning day and there's no judgment in this space. We're just humans going along our journey in life. We're not perfect. And so to ask yourself, in my presence, sometimes my people might feel this. Okay, I don't want that. So what can I do? What can I do differently? What can I do more of? What can I do less of? How can I support them better so that I show up in a way that supports them?
I think that's such a great question to ask as a leader for ourselves and also to ask our team how they want to feel for success this week. Do you advocate, Cara, after that you might do a check the following week to see if they actually felt that way? And if not, why not?
So you can do the future and you can do the retros. So I would actually, if you have your daily stand-ups, you could do a one word every morning. How do you feel today? How are you feeling about what's going on today? Or is there something that you don't want to feel but you might? Or your weekly meeting, start with it. Start with that question. Or, in the middle, maybe have that conversation about, okay, how did you feel last week when this happened? What was good about it? What wasn't so good about it? But the reason feelings are so important is they are personal. No one can take your feeling from you. It's not a place for judgment because I feel it. It's my feeling. And no one can tell you that you should be feeling a different way. People do. Don't get me wrong. People do tell you you shouldn't be feeling that or you should. But that's where the validation piece is really important.
That's such a good point, because when somebody tells you that, it almost feels that you're immediately not being validated for how you feel.
Absolutely. And that's trust.
And that is trust, yeah. How does this transform or come through into the financial performance of a business? Let's address that. What would you see as the transformations a company enjoys or benefits from bringing up emotional states in a culture?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And if we look at your people being change ready and say there is a new system being implemented or a new process and you're getting some vibes that this just isn't working, what are you listening out for to know that this isn't working? People aren't buying into it. There is that disgruntled, maybe it's the coffee machine conversations that are happening. That is the time to recognize that you need to be having better conversations with your people. That's what this is all about. It's about better conversations. It's about human talking to human and working out what can we do better? What happens to that financial output when your people aren't on board? The impact actually is a direct impact in what you've already spent. It's a time cost. This may take another 6 months to actually move your people forward into a place rather than carrot and stick. We are telling you, you're just going to use it and you're just going to, and I've given you training. I can't understand why this system isn't working. Why are you not doing your job? Okay, well, this is how I feel. This is what's going on for me. Maybe it's something, and the thing is, sometimes there's a really quick fix. Because you've had the conversation. And in terms of engagement, so there's a stat from Harvard Business Review, which talks to directly that employees who agree with, I feel connected to my company's culture, they are 4 times as likely to be engaged at work. That's a big figure there. in a world that we're talking about quiet quitting, people who are just being transactional and loud quitting, what's the opportunity that you've lost through having to retrain and bring in new people?
I think that's often an underestimated cost because it's the impact in the organization on the team,
Yep.
potentially clients, the knowledge that gets transferred.
And it's a human cost. It's a human cost of
Cost. That's a
actually
good point.
duty of care.
Yeah. How does this work, Cara, with hybrid teams or remote teams?
Yeah, that's really
Um,
interesting.
What's your view on fully remote and being a blend? So tell me, what's your take on that?
So, really interesting question to ask is, how do my people feel, those in the office, those who come in every day, how do they feel when they come in every day? And how do you not want them to feel when they come into the maybe HQ? How do those people feel who work in regional offices and maybe go in twice a week? How do our people feel who work at home? Once you've done that kind of mapping piece, of understanding what is the emotional landscape for those in the office, maybe return to office. How do we want this return to office to work successfully for our people? How do we want them to feel? We can tell them they've got to come. Of course we can. But actually, don't we want to get them to buy into this? So sometimes this can be done through a conference where you have everybody in one space, face to face. And it's actually an education piece about why emotions matter in the workplace, why they matter. Have you even ever thought about this emotional culture within your organization? And then it's about check-ins that can happen remotely. They don't have to be face to face. The work I do is through using cards, physical cards, but actually you can do the same thing online. We can have a deck of cards still online that people still look and choose from and share their feelings in that space. And actually, I'd suggest that is paramount because of the feeling of disconnect, because I'm at home, because I'm not visible, because I'm not physically in meetings. Actually, I can probably get away without showing how I feel to anybody. And that, of course, has a disconnect.
So are you saying that when it is fully remote work, it's even more important to understand how people are feeling? We can use cards to help with, but before there is a diktat to ever come back to the office full time, we must speak to every single person in the business and see how they feel about that. Do you think big organizations that have said return to work, Boots, Google, a couple of others, don't remember them all, do you think they went through that process?
Without a shadow of a doubt, of course they will have considered their people. They want the best for their people because they have a business to run. I remember one of my first ever mentors, my first ever job, what feels like a million years ago now. He said, the business of business is business. Never forget that. And that has stayed with me, really in my heart, that ultimately we have to get profits for the business to sustain itself. And we have to do whatever measures we have to do in order to get that. However, business is made of people and we need to influence hearts and minds. And so it can be as simple as an anonymous scorecard to assess the feelings within the organization. And I would suggest at the beginning, you have to start to have real conversations with people behind them. Otherwise, it is, again, just kind of lip service. But to assess what people are feeling, what did you feel when you got that announcement? And the other thing I would suggest is it's about mapping the journey. So you would take, say it's a return to office. Okay, every single touch point through that journey where the business is interacting with said person who you've asked to come back, how do we want them to feel when they get that letter? How do we want them to feel that first day when they turn up again and they don't really want to be there maybe? So what can we do on that first day to make it better? Or to foster more of what you want and to reduce some of the feelings that they don't want to have. What do you do on day 1? What do you do on day 5? What do you do on day 30? Yeah, etc., etc. So that you have mapped out a feeling journey of how you want them to feel.
I love the fact that you map out a feeling journey, really puts you into the other person's perspective, trying to step into their shoes. As we kind of wrap this up, what final practical tips would you give, maybe your top 2 tips would you give to a business owner or a leader to help them map out this feeling journey or to even start to consider how they might do that?
So the first thing I would suggest is it's almost just like a reminder to yourself regularly. that from my emotional space, leadership is not about what you do. It's about how you make people feel, and remembering that regularly, so that when it's difficult and hard and easy, when it's easy, it's easy. But when it's difficult and hard, remember how you make them feel. So that is the first step, I think, that we can all do differently immediately in our daily life, in every connection and every interaction that we have. The next thing actually is to consider just to sit down with some post-it notes yourself and just write on them simply a question: how do I want my people to feel this week? And just 5 post-it notes. I want them to feel this. Just choose some feeling words. If you're not sure, Google feeling words. Let me have a look and see what feeling words there are. Because as we expand our vocabulary, name it to tame it. I'm learning more about these words. Oh, I can use this one now. It resonates more. So, build your 5 words of this is how I want my team to feel. Just post-it notes, and how I don't want them to feel, and prioritize them. Number 1, what is that number 1 feeling I want my team to feel or not feel? I want them to feel connected. Okay, what is the one thing I'm going to do differently this week that allows them to feel connected? And 1 week later, go back and relook at it, reflect on it. Did I do it? Did I move the needle a little bit? We don't need big changes, but maybe just that little move of the needle.
Excellent point, and very practical and very doable. Callum, any thoughts on that from you?
Yeah, I really like what you said there, Cara, about leadership isn't what you do, it's how you make people feel. I 100% would agree with that. And I think being aware of that as a leader is very important. So I really like that quote. Thank you for sharing. Kind of back to what you said earlier on around, having a think, how do you want people to feel in your presence? And I think when people feel some of those things you mentioned, safe, comfortable, willing to take a risk, there's a safety net around them, versus on edge, stressed, disconnected, don't want to be there, it makes a huge difference to how you perform and just ultimately how much you enjoy what you do. So yeah, very much agree with you on those 2 points. Thanks for sharing.
All right, if people would like more practical tips, a workshop from you, how do they best get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. Cara Cunniff, 2 N's, 2 F's. Everyone spells my surname incorrectly. So 2 N's, Cunniff, 2 N's, 2 F's.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you, Cara. It's been really insightful. And I love the practical tips that you've shared with us that all of us can go away.
Yeah.
And everybody who's listening and watching this, we can get our post-it notes out and think through what you've said. So thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you so much.